I was lying in that hospital bed, tubes in my arms, when I heard the doctor whisper to my children that I didn't have long. They smiled. My own children smiled with relief when they thought I was dying. But then the doctor came back alone and handed me a file that changed everything. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret Ann Collins, and I'm 72 years old. If you saw me on the street, you'd probably think I was just another elderly woman. Maybe you'd notice my kind eyes or the way I always smile at strangers. But you wouldn't know my story. You wouldn't know that for the past 50 years, I built my entire life around 3 people who I thought were my whole world. I became a mother at 22. Sarah was my first, born with a head full of dark curls and lungs that could wake the neighborhood. 2 years later came Michael, quiet and thoughtful even as a baby. And then David, my surprise blessing, arrived when I was 28. My husband Robert and I were happy. We weren't rich, but we had love and we had dreams. We were building something together, but life had other plans. When Sarah was 12, Michael was 10, and David was only 6 years old, Robert died in a car accident. One moment he was kissing me goodbye on his way to work, and the next moment a police officer was standing at my door with his hat in his hands. Just like that, I became a widow at 34 with 3 children to raise alone. I could have fallen apart. Some people expected me to. But those 3 faces looking up at me, confused and scared and needing their mother to be strong, they gave me a reason to keep going. So I worked. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I was a secretary during the day, a waitress at night, and on weekends I cleaned houses. I wore the same coat for 8 winters. I cut my own hair. I ate whatever the kids left on their plates because I couldn't afford to waste food. But my children never went without. Sarah got her dance lessons. Michael got his baseball equipment. David got his art supplies. They had new clothes for school every year. They had birthday parties with cakes I baked from scratch at 2 in the morning. They had Christmas mornings filled with presents I'd saved for all year. I put all 3 of them through college without a single student loan. I paid for Sarah's dream wedding. I helped Michael with the down payment on his first house. I supported David through his divorce and career change. I never remarried even though I had offers. I told myself it was because no one could replace Robert. But the truth was simpler. I didn't want to divide my attention. I didn't want my children to feel like they had to share me. Everything I had, everything I was, belonged to them. People called me selfless. My neighbors said I was a saint. My friends told me I was the best mother they'd ever seen. I believed I was doing everything right. I believed that love and sacrifice would create an unbreakable bond. I believed my children would always love me the way I loved them. I believed that until the moment I heard them smile at the news of my death. 6 months before that terrible moment in the hospital, my life was everything I'd ever wanted it to be. I was living in the same cozy 3-bedroom house I'd bought 35 years ago, the one with the white picket fence and the rose bushes I'd planted when Sarah was a teenager. Every room held a memory. The kitchen where I'd taught all 3 kids how to bake cookies. The living room where we'd spent countless evenings watching movies together. The backyard where they'd learned to ride bikes, where Robert had built them a treehouse that still stood, weathered but strong. Sunday dinners were sacred in our family. It was a tradition I'd started when the kids were young, and somehow, miraculously, it had survived into their adult lives. Every Sunday at 5 o'clock, my children would arrive with their families. Sarah would pull up in her luxury SUV, always bringing her famous apple pie, the recipe I'd taught her. Michael would come with his wife Jennifer and their 2 boys, Tommy and Jake, who were 8 and 6. David, still single after his divorce, never missed a Sunday either. The house would fill with noise and laughter. My grandchildren would race through the hallway, their footsteps thundering overhead just like their parents once had. I'd cook pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, all the comfort food my family loved. We'd crowd around the old oak dining table. the same one Robert and I had bought at a yard sale when we were newlyweds. I'd look around at all those faces, 3 generations gathered under one roof, and my heart would feel so full I thought it might burst. Sarah would tell me about her marketing job and her husband's latest business venture. Michael would talk about his construction company and show me pictures of his current projects on his phone. David would share stories from his job at the tech startup, making us all laugh with his impressions of his eccentric boss. Jennifer would help me wash dishes while the men watched football. The boys would beg me to tell them stories about when their dad was little, and I'd embarrass Michael with tales of his childhood adventures. During the week, my days had a comfortable rhythm. I'd wake up early and tend to my garden, growing tomatoes and zucchini and herbs. Tuesdays, I volunteered at the community center, helping to organize food drives and teach cooking classes to young mothers. Thursdays were for my book club, a group of 6 women I'd known for over 20 years. We'd meet at the local library and discuss everything from mystery novels to our grandchildren's latest achievements. Fridays, I'd have lunch with my best friend Caroline, who'd been by my side since Robert's funeral. My health was good for a woman my age. I took my daily walks around the neighborhood. I did yoga twice a week at the senior center. I had my aches and pains, sure, but nothing serious, nothing that slowed me down. I was independent, active, and surrounded by people who cared about me, or so I thought. I had no idea that beneath the surface of those perfect Sunday dinners, something dark was growing. I had no idea that the people I trusted most were already making plans for a future that didn't include me. It started on a Tuesday afternoon in late March. I remember because the first daffodils had just bloomed in my garden, and I'd cut a few to put in a vase on the kitchen counter. Sarah had stopped by unexpectedly, which wasn't unusual. She often dropped in during the week to check on me or just chat over coffee. But that day felt different. I was in the hallway coming back from the bathroom when I heard voices in the kitchen. Sarah wasn't alone. Michael was there too, which was strange because he was usually at work on Tuesdays. Their voices were low, almost whispers, and something about the tone made me pause before entering the room. I couldn't make out the words, but I caught fragments. Something about timing, something about paperwork, something about not waiting too long. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, they stopped talking immediately. The silence was so abrupt it felt violent. They both turned to look at me with smiles that seemed painted on, artificial and too bright. Sarah's laugh came out too loud, too forced. Michael rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture he'd made since childhood whenever he was nervous or hiding something. "Mom, there you are," Sarah said, her voice unnaturally cheerful. "We were just talking about throwing you a surprise party for your birthday." I smiled and thanked them, but something felt wrong. My birthday wasn't until July, it was only March. Why would they be planning 4 months in advance? And why would Michael take time off work in the middle of the day to discuss a birthday party? It didn't make sense, but I pushed the feeling down. Maybe they were just being thoughtful, planning ahead because they had busy schedules. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing other small things. David's visits became less frequent. He used to stop by at least twice a week, sometimes just for 20 minutes to say hello and grab a homemade cookie. But suddenly, he was always busy, always had somewhere else to be. When I called him, his responses were short, distracted. He'd promised to visit soon and then cancel at the last minute with vague excuses about work emergencies or feeling under the weather. Then, there were the glances. During Sunday dinners, I'd catch my children looking at each other in ways I couldn't interpret. Silent conversations happening right in front of me that I wasn't part of. Sarah would raise her eyebrows at Michael. Michael would give a slight nod to David. David would shake his head almost imperceptibly. When I'd ask if everything was okay, they'd all assure me that everything was perfect. Nothing to worry about. Just work stress. Just life being busy. One evening, I found all 3 of them standing in my study, looking at the bookshelf where I kept old photo albums and family documents. They claimed they were reminiscing, looking for old pictures of their father. But the way they scattered when I walked in, the guilty expressions on their faces, It reminded me of when they were children caught doing something they shouldn't. I told myself I was being paranoid. Age was making me suspicious for no reason. These were my babies, the children I'd sacrificed everything for. They loved me. Of course they loved me, but deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, a small voice whispered that something was terribly, terribly wrong. I spent the next month fighting against my own instincts, building walls of denial brick by brick. Every time that uncomfortable feeling crept into my chest, I'd push it away with excuses and explanations. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and tell myself stories that made everything make sense. They're just busy, I'd think. Sarah has her demanding career and a household to manage. Michael's construction business is growing, and that takes time and energy. David is still recovering emotionally from his divorce. Of course, they can't spend as much time with me anymore. That's normal. That's what happens when children grow up and build their own lives. I should be grateful they visit at all. Some of my friends at the senior center barely heard from their children except on holidays. When I found Sarah in my study again, this time actually going through the file cabinet where I kept important papers, my heart started racing. But she had an explanation ready, delivered with that same bright smile. "Mom, I was just looking for that photo of Dad at the beach. Remember? The one from our vacation in Cape Cod? I want to get it framed for Michael's birthday." It sounded reasonable. It sounded loving, even. So I helped her look through the photo albums, ignoring the fact that she'd been in the file cabinet, not the shelf where the albums were kept. I ignored the way her hands had trembled slightly when I walked in. I ignored my own gut feeling screaming that something wasn't right. Michael started asking me questions during our Sunday dinners, casual questions that seemed innocent on the surface. How was I managing my bills? Had I thought about setting up automatic payments for utilities? Did I ever get confused about my medications? Had I noticed myself forgetting things more often? He framed it all as concern, as a loving son worried about his aging mother. He'd read an article, he said, about how many elderly people fall victim to scams. He just wanted to make sure I was safe. I appreciated his concern. At least, I told myself I did. I answered all his questions, assuring him that I was managing just fine. My bills were paid on time. I kept a detailed list of my medications. My mind was sharp as ever. But later, lying in bed, I'd wonder why he was asking. Why now? What had changed? Then came the conversation with David that I tried so hard to forget. We were sitting on my porch, drinking lemonade on a warm April afternoon, when he brought up nursing homes. Not for me specifically, he was quick to say, just in general. He'd been thinking about the future, about how hard it must be for me to maintain the house and the garden all by myself. Wouldn't it be nice, he suggested, to live somewhere with other people my age? Somewhere with activities and medical care right on site? Somewhere I wouldn't have to worry about mowing the lawn or fixing the water heater? I laughed it off, told him I wasn't ready for a nursing home yet, that I was perfectly capable of taking care of myself. But his words haunted me. They all haunted me. The questions, the suggestions, the unexpected visits, the whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Still, I convinced myself I was overreacting. These were my children. I'd given birth to them, nursed them, raised them with every ounce of love in my body. They wouldn't hurt me. The very idea was absurd, wasn't it? The day everything changed started like any other Sunday. Sarah arrived first, as she usually did, her arms full of groceries to help me prepare dinner. She set her designer purse on the kitchen counter, the expensive leather one her husband had bought her for their anniversary. We worked side by side, chopping vegetables and chatting about her week, and for a moment everything felt normal again. All my suspicions seemed foolish in the warm comfort of my kitchen. After about 20 minutes, Sarah excused herself to use the bathroom. I continued preparing the pot roast, seasoning it the way I'd done 1,000 times before. That's when I noticed her purse had tipped over, its contents spilling across the counter. Lipstick, keys, wallet, receipts, and a glossy brochure that had slid halfway under the fruit bowl. I wasn't trying to snoop. I was just cleaning up, being helpful. I reached for the items to put them back in her purse, and that's when I saw what the brochure was advertising. Luxury condominiums in the downtown area. Brand new construction. Spacious floor plans, premium finishes, starting at $800,000. My daughter and her husband lived in a beautiful home in the suburbs. They'd never mentioned wanting to move. Curious, I opened the brochure, thinking maybe she was helping a friend or client. Sarah worked in marketing after all. Maybe this was work-related. But then I saw the back page, and my blood turned cold. In Sarah's unmistakable handwriting, written in blue ink, were calculations. Numbers scrawled in the margins, crossed out and recalculated. And at the bottom, circled twice, was a figure that made my hands start to shake. $350,000. The exact amount my house was worth according to the last property assessment I'd received from the county. Below that number, she'd written other calculations, what looked like mortgage payments, down payment percentages, and at the very bottom, in her neat script, were the words, "After probate," with a question mark. I stood there frozen, the brochure trembling in my hands. Probate. That was the legal process that happened after someone died, when their assets were distributed. I knew because I'd gone through it when Robert passed away. My mind raced, trying to find an innocent explanation. Maybe she was just doing some financial planning. Maybe this had nothing to do with me. But I couldn't deny what I was seeing. My house's value, calculations for a luxury condo, the word probate, all in my daughter's handwriting. I heard the bathroom door open, heard Sarah's footsteps coming back down the hallway. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she'd hear it. Quickly, my hands shaking, I folded the brochure and tucked it back into her purse, arranging everything exactly as it had been. I turned back to the pot roast, gripping the counter to steady myself. Sarah walked back into the kitchen, completely relaxed, and continued our conversation as if nothing had happened. She laughed and smiled and helped me set the table, and I played along, responding automatically while my mind screamed. That night, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, seeing those numbers over and over again. $350,000. After probate. My daughter was planning for my death. She was calculating what she'd get when I was gone. 2 weeks after finding that brochure, my body betrayed me in a way my children had only dreamed of. I was in my garden on a Tuesday morning, pulling weeds from around the tomato plants, when a wave of dizziness hit me like a freight train. The world tilted sideways. My legs gave out. The last thing I remembered was the smell of dirt and roses before everything went black. I woke up in the hospital with fluorescent lights burning my eyes and an IV needle in my arm. A nurse told me my neighbor Caroline had found me unconscious in the garden and called an ambulance. They'd run tests, lots of tests, and now the doctor wanted to speak with me. Dr. Richard Patterson was a kind man in his 50s with gentle eyes and a calm voice. He sat beside my bed and explained that they'd found a mass in my abdomen. Cancer. Stage 3. The words felt unreal, like he was speaking a foreign language. He talked about treatment options, about chemotherapy and radiation, about survival rates and quality of life. He said that with aggressive treatment, I had a good chance. Without treatment, maybe 6 months to a year. I called my children. They arrived within hours, and for a brief moment, seeing their faces, I let myself believe I'd been wrong about everything. Sarah held my hand. Michael stood at the foot of my bed, looking concerned. David paced the small room, running his hands through his hair the way he did when he was upset. But then they started asking questions, and those questions had nothing to do with my health. "Mom, have you updated your will recently?" Sarah asked, her voice soft and concerned, as if this was a perfectly normal thing to ask someone who'd just been diagnosed with cancer. Michael chimed in, "What about your insurance policy? Do you know if it covers experimental treatments?" David stopped pacing and looked at me directly. And the house, Mom? Have you thought about what you want to happen with the house? If the treatment doesn't work? I stared at them. These three people I'd created and raised and loved more than life itself. They weren't asking if I was scared. They weren't asking if I was in pain. They weren't crying or hugging me or telling me everything would be okay. They were asking about my will, my insurance, my house. Over the next 2 days, their visits followed the same pattern. They'd ask about my health for maybe 5 minutes, and then the conversation would shift to my assets. Had I spoken to a lawyer? Where did I keep my important documents? Did I have a living will? What were my final wishes? On the third night, I was exhausted from the tests and the conversations and the crushing weight of what I was beginning to understand. The doctor came in around 8 p.m. to check on me. My children were there, sitting in chairs around my bed, their faces showing what I'd mistaken for concern. Dr. Patterson asked them to step outside for a moment while he examined me. I heard their footsteps in the hallway, heard them talking just outside my door. Their voices were low, but the door hadn't closed completely. Then I heard Dr. Patterson's voice, quiet and somber. I need to be honest with you. Without treatment, your mother doesn't have long. Perhaps a few months at most. And then I heard it. The sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. They smiled. I couldn't see them from my bed, but I heard it in their voices, in the collective exhale of relief. I heard Sarah let out a small, almost happy sigh. I heard Michael say, "Okay," in a tone that sounded like good news had just been delivered. I heard David clear his throat in a way that sounded like he was suppressing something. I lay in that hospital bed, paralyzed by shock, my eyes squeezed shut as if not seeing could make what I'd heard untrue. My children's footsteps faded down the hallway, probably going to the cafeteria to discuss their good fortune over coffee. The room felt freezing despite the warm blankets the nurses had given me. I'd never felt so alone in my entire life. About an hour later, Dr. Patterson returned. But this time, he was alone, and his face carried an expression I couldn't quite read. He glanced at the door, making sure it was fully closed, then pulled a chair close to my bed. From his briefcase, he withdrew a manila folder thick with papers and placed it gently on my lap. "Margaret," he said quietly, using my first name instead of the formal Mrs. Collins. "I need to show you something. I debated whether I should, but you have a right to know what's being done to you." My hands trembled as I opened the folder. The first document was a legal petition, filed 3 months ago in county court. The header read, "Petition for Declaration of Mental Incompetence." My name was listed as the subject. And there, at the bottom, as petitioners, were 3 names that made my stomach drop: Sarah Collins Martinez, Michael James Collins, and David Robert Collins. "I don't understand," I whispered, though part of me was beginning to understand all too well. Dr. Patterson's jaw tightened. "Keep reading." I turned the pages with shaking hands. There were psychiatric evaluations claiming I had advanced dementia, assessments describing me as confused, unable to manage daily tasks, prone to wandering and forgetting to eat, witness statements from my own children detailing incidents that had never happened. Sarah claimed I'd left the stove on and nearly burned down the house. Michael swore I'd gotten lost driving to the grocery store I'd been shopping at for 30 years. David described finding me confused and disoriented, unable to remember his name. Every single word was a lie. "These evaluations," I said, my voice breaking. "I never saw this psychiatrist, Dr. Leonard Ashford. I've never even heard of him." "I know," Dr. Patterson said grimly. I checked. Dr. Ashford has been dead for 2 years. Someone forged his signature and credentials. When your real medical files were subpoenaed by the attorney handling this petition, they came across my desk for review. That's when I discovered the discrepancy. I kept reading, each page worse than the last. There were financial documents showing that my children had already drafted papers to transfer my house into their names, split 3 ways, bank account transfer forms, ready to be signed. Documents dissolving my right to make my own medical decisions, giving them complete control. They'd even selected a nursing home, the cheapest one in the county, with multiple violations and complaints on record. But the most chilling document was near the bottom of the stack, a detailed timeline written in what looked like Michael's handwriting, outlining their entire plan. Step 1. Establish incompetence. Step 2. Gain legal control of assets. Step 3. Transfer property and funds. Step 4. Minimize care expenses. And there, circled at the bottom, was a note that made my blood run cold. Estate settles faster if no treatment pursued. They weren't just planning to take everything while I was alive, they were planning to make sure I didn't live long enough to fight back. Dr. Patterson handed me another sheet. This is a copy of your real medical evaluation from last month. The routine checkup you had with Dr. Morrison, perfect. Cognitive function. No signs of dementia or mental decline whatsoever. You're sharper than most people half your age. Dr. Patterson left me alone with those documents, promising to return in the morning to discuss what legal steps I could take. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was deafening. I sat in that sterile hospital room, surrounded by beeping machines and the smell of antiseptic, holding proof of my children's betrayal in my trembling hands. For a long time, I just stared at the papers, reading the same lies over and over, as if repetition might somehow make them less true. But the words didn't change. The forged signatures remained forged. The fabricated incidents remained fabricated. And the timeline, that cold, calculated timeline, remained a blueprint for stealing my life. Then the dam broke. I wept like I hadn't wept since the day they told me Robert was dead. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook my entire body and made the monitors beside my bed beep frantically. A nurse rushed in, concerned, asking if I was in pain. I couldn't even answer her. What could I say? Yes, I'm in pain, but not the kind your medicine can fix. My heart is being ripped apart by the 3 people I loved most in this world. When the nurse finally left, assuring me she'd check back soon, the memories began flooding in. Unbidden and relentless, they played in my mind like a cruel slideshow of everything I'd sacrificed. I remembered Sarah at 6 years old, burning with fever from pneumonia. I'd sat by her bedside for 3 days straight, sleeping in a chair, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, singing her favorite lullabies. I'd used the money I'd been saving for a new winter coat to pay for her antibiotics. That winter, I'd worn Robert's old jacket, 3 sizes too big, patched at the elbows. I remembered Michael at 16 crying in my arms after his girlfriend broke his heart. I'd held him for hours, telling him he was worthy of love, that he'd find someone who appreciated him. I'd stayed up until 3 in the morning making his favorite chocolate chip pancakes because I knew they'd make him smile. I remembered David's wedding 7 years ago. I'd spent my entire savings to help pay for it because his fiancée wanted something special. I'd worn a dress I'd bought at a thrift store and altered myself so they could have the open bar and the live band and the flowers she'd dreamed of. I'd been so happy to do it, so proud to give him that day. I remembered every birthday cake I'd baked at midnight after working double shifts, every science project I'd helped with while fighting exhaustion, every school play I'd attended, sitting in the front row and clapping until my hands hurt, every tear I'd wiped away, every nightmare I'd chased off, every fear I'd soothed with promises that I would always, always be there for them. I'd given them everything, my youth, my dreams, my health, my money, my time, my entire existence. I'd molded my life around theirs, making myself small so they could grow big. I'd been mother and father both, working myself to the bone so they'd never feel the absence of what they'd lost. And this was my reward: forged documents, lies to a judge, a cheap nursing home with a 1-star rating, a timeline calculating how quickly they could liquidate my existence. I cried until I had no tears left, until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen shut. I cried for the mother I'd been and the children I'd thought I'd raised. I cried for 50 years of love that had apparently meant nothing. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke to early morning light filtering through the hospital blinds. My eyes felt like sandpaper, my head pounded, and for a few blessed seconds, I'd forgotten where I was and why I was there. Then I saw the manila folder on the bedside table, and everything came crashing back. But something had changed during the night. Something fundamental had shifted inside me. I reached for the folder and opened it again, forcing myself to read through the documents with clear eyes. This time, instead of breaking down, I started noticing details I'd missed before: legal mistakes, inconsistencies in the timeline, the forged signature that didn't quite match the real one I found in the medical records Dr. Patterson had included. They'd been greedy, and in their greed, they'd gotten sloppy. A strange calm settled over me as I studied each page. This wasn't grief anymore. This was something harder, colder. This was clarity. I thought about my mother, dead 20 years now, who'd survived the Great Depression by being tougher than the circumstances trying to break her. I thought about how I'd survived losing Robert, how I'd clawed my way out of poverty and despair to raise 3 children alone. I'd worked jobs that destroyed my back and my feet. I'd gone hungry so my children could eat. I'd fought off landlords and bill collectors and my own exhaustion day after day after day. I hadn't survived all of that just to roll over and die for my children's convenience. They'd made a critical miscalculation. They'd assumed that because I was old, I was weak. Because I was kind, I was stupid. Because I'd spent 50 years putting them first, I'd forgotten how to fight for myself. They'd mistaken my love for weakness, my generosity for incompetence. They were wrong. I pressed the call button for the nurse. When she arrived, I asked for a phone and the hospital's patient advocate. I needed to make some calls, and I needed to understand my rights. The nurse, a woman in her 40s named Patricia, must have seen something in my face because she didn't ask questions. She just nodded and said she'd send someone right away. Within an hour, I'd made 3 phone calls. The first was to James Morrison, Robert's old lawyer, and one of the few people in this world I still trusted completely. He was semi-retired now, but when I told him what was happening, his voice went steel hard. He'd be at the hospital by noon, he promised, and he'd bring everything we needed to fight this. The second call was to my bank, requesting copies of all recent access attempts to my accounts and any changes to my account information in the past 6 months. The third call was to a private investigator whose number James had given me. If my children could fabricate evidence, I could gather real evidence. Around 10 a.m., my children arrived for their daily visit, carrying flowers and wearing concerned expressions like masks. Sarah kissed my cheek. Michael asked how I'd slept. David pulled up a chair and took my hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on my palm, the way he used to do when he was a little boy seeking comfort. I looked at their faces, these 3 strangers who wore my children's features, and I smiled. It was perhaps the most honest smile I'd given them in months, because it wasn't driven by love or hope or maternal devotion. It was driven by purpose. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told them softly, playing the part they needed me to play. "About the will and the house. You're right, I should get my affairs in order." The relief that flooded their faces was almost comical. Sarah squeezed my hand. Michael's shoulders visibly relaxed. David actually grinned. "We just want what's best for you, Mom," Sarah said, and I marveled at how easily the lie rolled off her tongue. "I know, sweetheart," I replied. "I know exactly what you want." James Morrison arrived at noon sharp, carrying a leather briefcase that had seen better days and wearing the same determined expression he'd worn when he'd helped me navigate Robert's estate all those years ago. He was 74 now, with silver hair and reading glasses perched on his nose, but his mind was as sharp as ever. We'd known each other for over 40 years, and he'd been at my kitchen table for countless Sunday dinners back when my children were young. He closed the hospital room door and pulled up a chair, his face grim as I handed him the manila folder. I watched him read through every document, his jaw tightening with each page. When he finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Margaret, this is elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, forgery. We could have them arrested today," he said, his voice shaking with controlled anger. "No," I said firmly. "Not yet. I want to do this right. I want every piece of evidence documented before we make a move. Can you help me with that?" James studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Tell me what you need." Over the next hour, we constructed a plan. First, James would petition the court to dismiss the incompetency filing, presenting my real medical records and the evidence of forgery. But we'd do it quietly without alerting my children, giving them enough rope to hang themselves. Second, he'd hire a forensic accountant to examine any unusual activity in my financial accounts. Third, we'd arrange for independent psychiatric evaluations from 3 separate doctors, creating an undeniable record of my mental competence. But I had ideas of my own, ideas that made James raise his eyebrows. "I want security cameras installed in my house," I told him. "Small ones, the kind they can't see. I want to document everything they do, everything they say when they think I'm not watching." "That's risky," James warned. "If they find out—" "They won't," I interrupted, "because they think I'm a confused old woman who doesn't understand technology. They've underestimated me for the last time." James made the arrangements. Within 3 days, while I was still in the hospital beginning my first round of chemotherapy, a technician James trusted had installed 6 hidden cameras throughout my house. Living room, kitchen, study, hallway, and one in my bedroom closet pointed at the safe where I kept important documents. The chemotherapy was brutal. I'd chosen the most aggressive treatment available, not because I was afraid of dying, but because I refused to die and let them win. Every wave of nausea, every moment of exhaustion, I channeled into fuel for what was coming. The nurses commented on how strong I was, how positive. They had no idea that my strength came from rage, pure and focused. I also requested copies of all my medical records going back 5 years. Every doctor's visit, every test, every evaluation. James helped me organize them into a file that proved beyond any doubt that I'd been healthy, sharp, and completely competent. We documented everything. Meanwhile, the private investigator, a former police detective named Marcus Chen, began his work. I'd given him permission to examine my children's financial records, their recent purchases, their communications. Within a week, he'd uncovered that Sarah had already picked out furniture for her new downtown condo. Michael had consulted with a real estate agent about the best time to sell my house for maximum profit. David had researched the minimum legal requirements for nursing home care in our state. They were planning my future like I was already gone. But here's what they didn't know. I was getting better. The cancer was responding to treatment. My doctor was cautiously optimistic. And while they waited for me to die, I was building an airtight case against them. 3 months passed. 3 months of chemotherapy that left me weak and nauseous but alive and fighting. 3 months of playing the frail, confused mother while cameras captured every betrayal. 3 months of letting my children think they were winning while I built my case, brick by brick. The footage Marcus retrieved from the hidden cameras was devastating. I watched it alone in James's office, my hands gripping the armrests of my chair as my children's true faces were revealed on the screen. There was Sarah the day after my second chemo treatment, going through my jewelry box and photographing each piece. She held up my mother's pearl necklace, the one I'd promised her years ago, and told her husband over the phone that it was worth at least $5,000. She laughed, actually laughed, as she estimated the value of my possessions like she was at an estate sale. There was Michael, measuring rooms in my house with a tape measure, making notes on his phone. The camera caught him telling his wife Jennifer that knocking down the wall between the kitchen and dining room would increase the property value by at least $30,000. He talked about my home, the home where I'd raised him, like it was an investment property he was flipping. There was David sitting in my study going through my filing cabinet. He found my life insurance policy and photographed every page. Then he called someone, a lawyer apparently, asking about beneficiary rules and how quickly policies paid out after death. He mentioned that his mother was in late-stage cancer treatment, his voice clinical and detached, like he was discussing a business transaction. But the worst footage came from a Sunday dinner 2 weeks ago, after I'd gone to bed early, exhausted from treatment. The cameras caught all three of them sitting around my dining table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, dividing up my possessions like vultures over a carcass. Sarah wanted the china and the jewelry. Michael called dibs on the house and any tools or equipment in the garage. David claimed he should get a larger share of the financial assets since he was single and didn't have a spouse's income. They argued about percentages and fairness, their voices rising, until finally they agreed to split everything equally after the expenses were handled. "What expenses?" Sarah had asked. Michael's response made my blood run cold even watching it weeks later. "Whatever nursing home Mom ends up in, we go for the cheapest option. No point wasting the inheritance on fancy care she won't even remember." Now, sitting in James's office with the flash drive containing all that footage, I felt a strange sense of peace. The grief had burned away, leaving something harder and clearer in its place: justice. "I want them to face this publicly," I told James. "I want everyone to see what they've done." James nodded, understanding immediately what I meant. "A family meeting?" "More than that," I said, an idea forming. "I want witnesses, real witnesses. People they respect, people whose opinions matter to them. I want them to be exposed in front of everyone." We spent the next week making arrangements. James contacted 2 police officers who specialized in elder abuse cases and explained the situation. They agreed to attend as observers. I called my husband's old business partner, Thomas Brennan, who'd known my children since they were babies. I invited Dr. Patterson and the 3 psychiatrists who'd evaluated me, asking them to bring their official reports. I even invited Caroline, my best friend, who'd suspected something was wrong, but hadn't known the extent of it. Then I called each of my children personally, my voice weak and tired, playing the role one final time. "I need to have a family meeting this Sunday," I told them. "An important announcement about my estate and my wishes. Can you all come for dinner? I have something I need to tell you." They agreed immediately, eagerness barely concealed in their voices. They thought this was it. They thought I was finally giving them what they wanted. They had no idea what was waiting for them. Sunday arrived cold and clear. I'd been in remission for 3 weeks, though I hadn't told my children. Let them think I was still dying. Let them come to my house with their fake sympathy and their real greed. By 4:30, my dining room was full, not just with my children and their spouses, but with every person I'd invited to witness this moment. Sarah, Michael, and David arrived to find Dr. Patterson sitting in the living room, Thomas Brennan in the corner, 2 police officers in plain clothes by the window, the 3 psychiatrists who'd evaluated me on the couch, Caroline holding my hand, and James Morrison standing beside me like a guardian angel in a 3-piece suit. The confusion on my children's faces would have been comical if my heart wasn't pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Mom, what's going on?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. "Why are all these people here?" "Sit down," I said quietly. "All of you, sit down." They sat, exchanging worried glances. Michael's leg bounced nervously. David's face had gone pale. Sarah gripped her husband's hand. I stood at the head of the table, the same spot where I'd served them thousands of meals, where I'd celebrated their birthdays and graduations and achievements, where I'd loved them unconditionally for 50 years. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "I asked you here today because I have something important to share, something everyone in this room needs to see." I nodded to James, who turned on the television mounted on the wall. The screen flickered to life, and then they watched themselves. Sarah going through my jewelry, laughing about values and prices. Michael measuring my walls, planning renovations. David photographing my insurance policy, discussing payout timelines. And finally, the footage from that Sunday dinner. All three of them dividing up my possessions while discussing the cheapest possible nursing home. The room was absolutely silent except for their voices coming from the speakers. Sarah's face went from white to red. Michael stood up, then sat back down, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. David stared at the screen, frozen. When the video ended, I picked up the manila folder from the table. "And this," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "is the petition you filed to have me declared mentally incompetent, with a forged doctor's signature, with fabricated psychiatric evaluations, with lies about incidents that never happened. Also, you could steal my house, my money, everything I worked, my entire life to build." Sarah found her voice first. "Mom, we can explain. We were just worried about you." "Stop," I said, and something in my tone made her mouth snap shut. "I don't want to hear another lie from your mouth. Not one more." I gestured to the psychiatrists. "These 3 doctors have evaluated me. All confirm I'm completely mentally competent. Dr. Patterson, please share my medical status." Dr. Patterson stood. "Mrs. Collins is in remission. Her cancer responded exceptionally well to treatment. Her prognosis is excellent." The look on their faces, the absolute horror as they realized I wasn't dying, that their timeline had fallen apart, but I wasn't finished. "I spoke with my lawyer extensively about pressing charges," I continued. "Fraud, forgery, attempted financial exploitation, elder abuse. The officers here have reviewed all the evidence. You could all go to jail." Michael stood up, his voice desperate. "Mom, please, we're your children." "No," I interrupted, and my voice finally broke. "My children died the day you smiled when the doctor said I was dying. I don't know who you are, but you're not the babies I raised." I took a breath, steadying myself. "But I'm not pressing charges. Instead, I've made other arrangements. Every asset I own, this house, my savings, my investments, all of it is being donated to the National Center on Elder Abuse. They're opening a legal aid center in your father's name to help victims of financial exploitation." The room erupted. Sarah burst into tears. Michael started shouting about how unfair this was. David just sat there, his face in his hands. "You get nothing," I said, my voice rising above their protests. "Not one penny, not one photograph, not one dish or spoon or memory. Nothing." The aftermath was chaos. Sarah's sobs turned to screaming. She lunged toward me, but Thomas stepped between us, his face stern. Michael pounded his fist on my dining table, the same table where I'd served him his first solid food as a baby, demanding I reconsider, that I was making a terrible mistake. David sat motionless, staring at his hands, his silence somehow more damning than his siblings' outbursts. The police officers stepped forward then, their presence a quiet reminder that this could still go very differently for my children. One of them, Officer Rodriguez, spoke in a calm but firm voice. "I suggest you all leave now. Mrs. Collins has been more than generous in not pressing charges. I wouldn't test that generosity further." Sarah turned to me one last time, mascara running down her face. "Mom, please, we're family. We made mistakes, but we're still your children. You can't just throw us away." I looked at her, really looked at her, searching for any sign of the little girl who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them flowers. That child was gone, if she'd ever really existed. "You threw me away first," I said quietly. "The moment you forged those documents, the moment you smiled at news of my death, you made your choice. Now live with it." They left, escorted by the officers to ensure they actually departed. Their protests echoed down my driveway through my garden, fading finally into the distance. When the door closed behind them, the silence felt like a blessing. Over the next month, I executed the plan I'd made with James. The house sold quickly to a young family with 3 children. I watched from my window as they explored the backyard, the kids squealing with delight at the old treehouse Robert had built. It hurt, but it also felt right. The house deserved to be filled with real love again. I moved into a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment downtown, the kind of place I'd always dreamed of but never allowed myself because I was too busy saving for my children's futures. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a modern kitchen I actually enjoyed cooking in, a small balcony where I grew herbs and flowers. I furnished it with new things, not a single item from my old house. I wanted no reminders, no ghosts of the past following me into this new life. I joined a book club at the local library, made friends with my neighbors, and volunteered at the elder care legal center that bore Robert's name. I met people who'd survived similar betrayals, and in their stories, I found both heartbreak and healing. My cancer remained in remission. Every 3 months, I'd go for checkups, and every 3 months, Dr. Patterson would smile and tell me I was doing remarkably well. Spite, it turned out, was excellent medicine. My children tried to contact me repeatedly. Letters arrived at my lawyer's office, emails to an address I'd abandoned, phone calls to a number I'd changed. Sarah sent a card on my birthday. Michael tried to show up at my old house, only to find strangers living there. David hired a private investigator to find my new address, but James had made sure my information was sealed. I read one of Sarah's letters once. It was full of apologies and excuses, explanations about financial stress and bad influences, promises that they'd changed and learned and grown. She begged for forgiveness, for a second chance, for the relationship we used to have. I burned it in my kitchen sink and never read another. Some people, friends from my old life, told me I was too harsh. That family was family, that forgiveness was divine, that I should at least hear them out. But those people hadn't watched their own children calculate the value of their death. They hadn't seen the relief on faces that should have shown grief. I chose peace over blood, and for the first time in 72 years, I chose myself. I'm 75 years old now, 3 years since that Sunday dinner that changed everything. I'm writing this from my balcony, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and amber. There's a cup of tea beside me, still steaming. Classical music plays softly from my living room. In an hour, Caroline and I are meeting some friends for dinner at that new Italian restaurant downtown. This is my life now. Peaceful, purposeful, mine. People often ask me if I have regrets, if I lie awake at night wondering if I was too cruel, too unforgiving, too final in my decision. The answer is simple. No. Not even once. What I regret is the years I spent believing that unconditional love meant accepting anything, that being a good mother meant sacrificing everything, even my dignity, even my right to be treated with basic human decency. I regret teaching my children through my actions that I would always be there no matter how they treated me, that my love had no boundaries, no conditions, no breaking point. I should have taught them differently. I should have shown them that love is a two-way street, built on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine care. That family isn't just about shared DNA, it's about shared values and integrity, that the people who truly love you would never celebrate your suffering or profit from your pain. There's a quote I heard once that stuck with me. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. Most people get it backwards. They think it means family comes first, always, no matter what. But the full saying means the opposite. It means the bonds we choose, the relationships built on loyalty and love and sacrifice that goes both ways, those are stronger than biological connections. My children taught me that lesson the hardest way possible. The legal aid center that bears my husband's name has helped over 200 elderly people in the past 3 years. People whose children stole from them, who were abandoned in substandard care facilities, who were declared incompetent to steal their life savings. Every person we help, every case we win, feels like Robert and I are still making a difference in this world. That our lives, our marriage, our struggles, meant something beyond the 3 people who betrayed us both. That center is my legacy now, not Sarah or Michael or David, not grandchildren I'll never meet, or family dinners that will never happen, but real, tangible good in the world. People protected, lives saved, justice served. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt sometimes. There are moments when I see a grandmother with her grandchildren in the park and something in my chest aches. There are holidays when the apartment feels too quiet. There are memories that surface unexpectedly, moments of genuine love from when they were young, and I have to remind myself that those children grew into adults I don't recognize. But pain is not the same as regret. I can acknowledge the loss while still knowing I made the right choice. The moral. Here's what I want you to understand. What I wish someone had told me 50 years ago. Sacrifice without appreciation becomes exploitation. Love without respect becomes abuse. And family without loyalty is just a word on a birth certificate. Being kind doesn't mean being a doormat. Being loving doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. Being a parent doesn't mean your children own you, your time, your resources, or your future. You are allowed to have boundaries. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you share their blood. Especially if you share their blood. Your worth is not measured by how much you can endure or how much you're willing to sacrifice. It's measured by how you treat yourself and how you allow others to treat you. Teach people through your actions that you deserve respect, that your love is valuable and should be treasured, not exploited. And if someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Don't wait for the second betrayal or the third or the moment when you're lying in a hospital bed overhearing them celebrate your impending death. I survived because I finally chose myself, because I finally understood that loving yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary, it's survival, call to action. So now I want to ask you, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have forgiven them, given them another chance, tried to rebuild what was broken? Or would you have walked away like I did, chosen peace over blood, chosen yourself over family obligation? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear your stories, your thoughts, your own experiences with family betrayal or difficult choices. Because these conversations matter. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And if this story touched something in you, if it made you think or feel or remember, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's struggling with their own difficult family situation. Someone who needs permission to choose themselves. Someone who needs to know that it's okay to walk away from people who don't value them. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel for more powerful real-life stories about survival, justice, and the strength it takes to rebuild your life from the ground up. Remember, you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter your age, no matter your relationship to the person mistreating you. You deserve peace. You deserve a life that honors the person you are, not just the role others expect you to play. Never forget your worth, and never be afraid to fight for the life you deserve. Thank you for listening to my story. Now go live yours with the courage to choose yourself when you need to,